There we go. It's great to see everybody here tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to make a brief introduction, remind people of some protocols. Then, since we are a small group, I'll ask each of you to briefly introduce yourselves, and then I'll turn the floor over to Michael, our guest and fellow Israel writer, member of the faculty of the Arva Institute, and somebody who every time I'm able to ride with him, I learn something. So I'm very excited that he's here tonight. Key protocol to remember, like I said, we are recording the call. Hopefully that's okay with everybody. I would ask if when you're not speaking, if you leave yourself on mute, that way we don't have interruptions when there's an ambulance, a dog, a cat, or a lawnmower, or whatever else could be in the background. So I'd appreciate that. And with that, let me turn it over to and just introduce yourself briefly, name, where you're from, whether you're doing the ride this year, you've done it in the past, to give Michael a little context as he shares with us some of his insights from his work at the Institute. Bill Rosenbaum, could I start with you?
Sure. Welcome. I'm Bill Rosenbaum. I'm from San Diego, California. I've been on the ride 2 times, and I will not be there this year, but God willing, next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, you want to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm happy to. My name's Peter Dratch, and I've been on the ride, I think, 4 times, and I try and put together a Colorado contingent about every other year. I'm just retired. I'm a retired biologist with Fish and Wildlife Service.
Awesome. Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, hi. My name is Andrew Lowinger. I'm a retired lawyer in Washington, D.C. I will be doing the ride this fall, first time. My friend Saul Pilchin coaxed me into doing it with him. So I'm looking forward to it.
Great. Thank you. Someday we'll compare notes on Washington, D.C. lawyers. I'm not one, but my family includes a few people who were. Hanouk, want to introduce yourself?
I'm Hanoch Fields. I live in Philadelphia. I'm a retired military chaplain, a rabbi, and this is my first time I'm riding, but I'm an avid cyclist, and I've been training and doing a lot of riding this summer.
Thank you. Ralph, good to see you.
Nice to see you. Ralph Rosenberg. I've done the ride 8 times. Live in Avon, Connecticut, and Melvin Village, New Hampshire. Not doing the ride this year.
Thank you. Sorry you're not doing it this year. Not thanking you for that part. Jeannie?
Hi, I'm Jean Kidd. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. If all goes well, I'm doing the ride this year. I've tried for 3 years in a row.
Hopefully this time is the charm.
Hopefully this time is the charm. I do need to get back on the bike. I've had a long year. But I go to Israel a lot. I've been there now 8 or 9 times. I'm an artist. And one of my pieces I just found out is going to be outside the main entrance of Sheba Hospital.
Oh, wow. That's wonderful.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
An honor that I just found out last week. So
that's wonderful.
big
If you
deal.
have questions, it sounds like you're starting to prepare now for the ride. If you have any questions about training, let us know. We can help.
I have more questions about the fundraising. Because I prepared for the ride the first year, and then I think it's got stuck because of COVID, and then my husband got cancer, and so this is
okay. So let's arrange a call.
Okay.
You and Ilana, or you, Ilana, and I can talk, and we can work that out.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Steve, want to briefly introduce yourself? You're still on mute. Still on mute. Steve, you're not coming through. Okay, Steve, I'll come back to you because you're still on mute and I can't do much about that.
I'm unmuted. How
Okay,
about now?
now try and keep it brief, because
Sure, sure. I'm not a writer. I'm just interested in Arava Institute and what I can learn today. I'm
That
a
sounds
supporter.
great. Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. Nice to have you here.
Ashland, Oregon.
Thank you. Bill, you're next on my screen. Bill
Again?
Huron.
Hi there.
Oh, Bill, there's
Different
two
Bill.
Bills. Other Bill.
Bill Huron coming to you from Colorado, Congregation Beth Evergreen. First time to Israel, first time doing the ride, and I'm very excited about it, except for the fundraising part, because I'm only 48% of the way there.
That puts you 48% ahead of some other people and 52% behind a few people. So you'll get there.
Okay.
Thanks. Mindy?
I am also from Colorado. I see there's 3 Colorado people here from Beth Evergreen. Rabbi Jamie convinced me and my husband to join the ride. And I've lived in Israel for a while. I go back and forth every once in a while. I haven't been there for a while though. Looking forward to it. And if our tandem is working, we're bringing a tandem. Otherwise, we're bringing our e-bikes.
Sounds good. Sure you know the challenges of taking your e-bike on the plane. So
Yeah, it turns out with Specialized, they have these water cage size batteries, which are small enough to carry on
that's
the plane.
perfect. Yep, that's the right one. Good.
So, yep, we're all set.
Glad we resolved that. And third Bill. It's a big night for Bills. Usually it's David's.
Bill Strusan. I'm from Austin, Texas, but I'm currently also in Colorado. We have a house in Durango, and we spend the summer up here. And I just got through with a training ride. Not a lawyer. I'm actually a psychiatrist. So it's first time in Israel, first time doing the ride.
Wow, that's awesome. 2 big landmarks. Thank you. Laura, you want to introduce yourself? Nice to see another Eisenberg here.
Well, actually, I'm holding David's place for him until he comes home. I'm not riding, but I would like to find out if there's a hiking component.
We can talk about that. There's a touring component. There's not a hiking component, but we'll talk about it.
Okay.
Alan, I feel like I just talked to you 40 minutes ago, but you want to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Sure, Alan Friedman, alum from 18 and 19, 2 amazing trips. So for those of you who it's your first time, you couldn't be in better hands than the Israel ride for a wonderful experience. I'm on the fence because I'm waiting for a gig, but hopefully I'll find a way to join this year again. So it's a pleasure to be here.
That's great. Thank you. Elizabeth Rappaport? You're on mute.
You're not going to watch? Well, what is it about so far?
We're bikers, but not 5 days in a row type bikers. But I was just curious, so I logged in.
That's awesome. Nice to have you here.
Thank you.
Who's next? Neil Epstein?
Hi, I'm eating dinner, so I'm sparing you the view of it on live camera just for a second. I'll say hi. This is going to be my 4th ride. I live in New York City, work in the financial district. I've been in Israel many times, and looking forward to this ride, especially this year. Take care.
That's great. Thank you. Tanya? Wow, I haven't seen you in years. Briefly introduce.
And I'm sorry that I'm not opening my video, but I have to be in and out. And I agree with Neil. I did 3 times the ride, and it was the best experience in my life. And I would love to be in shape, but I think I cannot do it anymore, unfortunately. But it's fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you for the endorsement. Sharon Cohen? Sharon, can you introduce yourself? She might have stepped away for a moment. I think last as we go around the table is my my friend and inspiration and the founder of the ride and the chair. Howie, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Howie Rodenstein. Welcome, everybody. We look forward to seeing many of you on this year's ride or future rides. And thank you all for your support of the Arava Institute, which is an amazing, amazing place. And you'll, for those of you who are first time on the ride, you'll learn an awful lot more about it as we're on the ride. And welcome. And you're very lucky to be able to hearing from an amazing educator, Rabbi Michael Cohen, who I don't want to take your introduction away, David, but he's one of my favorites.
At Michael's request and some other timing considerations, my introduction will be very brief. I think the key roles that Michael is filled on the ride for years. He's sometimes a writer, sometimes an educator, sometimes there as a representative of the amazing work of the Arava Institute. Also, when he's here in the United States, he's worked closely with Faye on various initiatives in the US. So I think from the perspective of this audience, he knows you because he's dealt with, if not each of you individually, a lot of other people who are learning about the Institute here in the US over the years. And he knows the Institute. He's been there, he's been a teacher, he's a leader, he's a writer. I don't know if people saw some of what he published today. There was a great piece I saw earlier today in the Jerusalem Post. He can just bring a lot of insight to all of this. And it's great we have an opportunity to talk with him and learn from him tonight. And for those of you who will be on the ride this year, you'll have another opportunity in about 9 weeks. With that, let me turn the floor over to Michael.
Good evening, everyone, and I want to thank David and Howie for those all too kind words. So I'm going to talk about the Institute and then a bit about the ride, but I want to also leave a lot of time for questions and answers. So I first want to say a little bit about the Institute, and then also really I want to share some vignettes, which I think will really give you a flavor of what we're able to do there. So we have kind of two major components of the Institute. The academic program, where we bring together Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians, Moroccans. Our student body is ideally 1/3 Israeli Jewish, 1/3 Israeli Arab, and 1/3 the rest of the world. About half of those are from the United States. Students come for a semester or a full year. They're accredited through Ben-Gurion University. They take 4 or 5 classes with some of the leading experts in their field when it comes to environmental studies for the region. We do environmental touring. We put on our green glasses, if you will, and tour the region. We also have what we call the camel in the tent, which is the conflict. And we deal with that in a number of different ways. And one is the dialogue project, where the students talk to each other, listen to each other, and hear and say the most difficult things that need to be said. And they're very intense. Things don't fall apart of them. More than happy to go into more detail about that. This sounds really trite, but I've seen it for 26 years since I've been involved with the Institute, since its doors opened. This is a program that does change people's lives. So that's the academic program. In addition, we have a number of different research centers, transboundary research centers. There's the Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Conservation, the Center for Sustainable Agriculture, the Center for Transboundary Water Management, the Center for Arid Eco-Socio-Agriculture. And then our 2 newest initiatives are our Center for Environmental Diplomacy. We've learned over 26 years, as well as other Israeli Palestinian NGO non-government organizations who live in what's called Track 2. Track 1 are government negotiators, government officials. The Track 1 folks have not exactly delivered in the last number of decades, but on the Track 2 level, the ecosystem that we operate in, with other academic institutions and other non-government organizations, there's been successes. And so we decided to take those successes and enlarge them and give them a larger voice. And so we established our Center for Environmental Diplomacy, where we're doing work in Gaza, we're doing in the West Bank, and in other places as well. And again, I can go into more in depth about that. And then our latest initiative is our Center for Climate Change Policy and Research. If this summer is anything, and I think this is the summer we will all look back at our lives and say, boy, that was a nice summer. I think we're entering a new chapter when it comes to the climate crisis. And we've been dealing with and addressing the climate crisis at the Institute for a number of years now, but we really heightened that by setting up this Center for Climate Change Policy and Research, because it is the issue that we all need to address. The climate is not going to wait for Israelis and Palestinians to solve their problems before it gets better. We need to start working on that now. So again, I can go into more detail about that. But what I really wanted to share are vignettes, because I think that's really will speak to the soul of the Institute and why you're writing and why you're supporting this amazing organization called the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies. So one vignette, and we've been doing this, as I said, for 26 years. We're starting our 8th long stay starting next week. And the whole family goes over. Rowie is now grown up. He's made Aliyah. He lives in Israel. Shira is grown up too. And Allison, my wife, keeps doing this back and forth thing. And in all but 2 of our visits, Allison has actually worked at the Institute. So one of our early visits, she was, and she's done a variety of things. She was in charge, or was one of the volunteers for English tutoring for some of the students. Remember, students come to the Institute on 3 levels of English. For some, it's their first language. For some, it's their second. And for some, it's their third. So we are always juggling a lot at the Institute: politics, religion, language differences, a whole lot. So she had a Palestinian woman, Ikram, who wore the hijab, very traditional Palestinian woman, who had very little English. And Allison worked with her very closely, developed a really, really wonderful friendship. Fast forward years later, and we're invited by Ikram to her PhD presentation at Ben Gurion University in flawless English. But it was what she did at the Institute that launched her so that she was able to do that. And I could go over lots and lots of stories where the Institute has launched people's careers. And so Ikram is indicative of a lot of what happens at the Institute as well. As I mentioned, we do environmental touring of the region. And again, in one of the early years, and every year we go to the northern Negev, to some of the unrecognized Bedouin villages that are in pretty almost third world conditions in terms of how people are living. And on that particular year, an Israeli Arab, Mazen Zawabi, and an Israeli Jew, Ilana Milam, were really kind of taken back by what they saw. And so they decided to do something about it. And so they went to China to study biodigesters. Biodigesters, you can take animal waste and turn it into clean methane, because there's a lot of animal waste in these Bedouin villages, as well as they're burning wood in their tents, which doesn't make sense in the desert to be burning wood. You're breathing the smoke, you're getting burnt. It's very bad for the women who are doing this and the children. So they went to China, they learned about biogas. China's been doing biogas for centuries, and it's a major part of their culture. They came back with that knowledge and brought it to the Institute, and then the Institute began to introduce it to various Bedouin communities. Fast forward a number of years later, there's another Arava alum, Yair Teller, who takes some of the research that we've been doing with biogas in various different models. And he starts doing different models. Long story short, he eventually founds a company called Home Biogas. You can Google it and find it. It is one of the major biogas companies in the world right now. And when Ban Ki-moon, the former UN Secretary General, came to Israel a number of years ago, and he came to Home Biogas, he said, "We need these all over the world." And again, this was launched because of how we do the Institute, how we expose our students to the environmental challenges of that region. And so that's another success story. The thing I also want to say, another thing about the Institute, is that we bring people together to change lives and perceptions. And we do that by building trust. And the trust is done in a number of ways, but one of them is what I call touch points. We don't just bring people together for the conflict. This actually hurts to do that. But if you have other touch points, sharing food, sharing music, sharing religion, that happens all throughout the semester. But we actually do a culture night every semester. where students present poetry, songs, food from their different cultures. And part of what this does, and what the other touch points do, is it humanizes the other. And when you understand the person beyond their labels of Israeli, Palestinian, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, whatever, and you see him as a real human being, just like you are, that's where the trust comes in. Now, the trust doesn't mean that the problems go away. The trust just means that I now trust you, so I'm willing to tackle those difficult issues. And that's a key component of why we see amazing long-term, both personal and professional relationships that come out of the Institute. So that's just another kind of piece that I want you to be aware of as well. So another vignette, two of our alumni, Suleiman Halassa and Nina Kedem, Jordanian and Israeli. Notice that in the Israeli-Jordanian peace treaty that was signed actually not that far from Kibbutz Keturah, where the Rabbi Institute is located, and really kind of in some ways had an influence, that peace treaty, on the Institute being founded. In a lot of that, in certain sections of that peace treaty between Israel and Jordan, it talks about the Arava Valley, it talks about the environment, it talks about economic cooperation there, and that part of the peace treaty has been collecting dust for over a quarter of a century now. And so Rina and Suleiman said something needs to be done about this. And so they created an organization called JISR, which means a bridge in Arabic. It stands for Jordan Israel Center for et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they are now reviving that part of the Israeli-Jordanian peace treaty that was really remaining dormant for 25 years. And they have projects across the border that are working on. And that's really, our ideal goal of what we want to see our alumni doing after they leave the Institute as well. We not only do environmental touring, but we also, from this class where we deal with the conflict, we also usually go to Jerusalem and things that are really difficult. And so we group of Israelis and Palestinians, and we go to Yad Vashem, and we go with Israelis and Palestinians as well as the other students, and we go to Lifta, which is a destroyed Palestinian village just outside of Jerusalem. And I want to be really clear, I'm not comparing those two events, but they are both incredibly important in the narratives of both people. And we expose the other to that part of the narrative. Those are powerful moments in both directions when we make that visit there. And as you know, things are sometimes not always easy there because of, as the politics go up and down, the violence goes up and down. So I want to share a little vignette that one of my students wrote on my last visit there. A few nights ago, I was sitting outside with a few people from the Rabbi Institute. It was early evening, we were drinking tea, and I could see the stars peering through the clouds. It was the day after the attack in Bnei Brak. Feeling of tension hung heavy in the air. Sitting there beside me were Israelis, Palestinians, and Americans. When I saw a light spread across the sky, I turned to my friend. "Wow, did you see that shooting star?" She replied, "Make a wish." It was suddenly so obvious to me. I wish for all of us to learn to see each other as humans, to bear witness to each other's pain, to hear each other's stories. Less than a year ago, I could not imagine such a wish. I moved to Israel when I was 5 years old, but I'd never formed friendship with Israeli Arabs. I was full of fear. Now I have Palestinian friends who listen to my perspective and acknowledge my pain, and I hear theirs. What transpires at the Institute is not a sentimental, oversimplistic kumbaya experience. The conversations are difficult, but we do not have the luxury to disengage. If there's one thing I would wish for at this moment, it's that everyone could have the opportunity to learn what I've learned at the Rabbi Institute about making peace in the region. So I want to stop there about the Institute. I'm happy to answer other questions, and I want to say a bit about the ride. I've done 7 of the rides, I believe, if I've got my count correct. It's an amazing experience. It's amazing as an experience both to learn about Israel, to learn about the environment, and to learn about the Institute. The staff along the way or the crew, I should say, of the ride are made up of students and alumni from the Arava Institute. So you have both formal and informal times to meet with them. We bring in different professors from the Institute who will give drop-in lectures along the ride. And so you'll hear from some of the leaders in their field talking about aspects of the environment there as well. You will bond with each other as you ride, as you get up very, very early in the morning. You will eat great food and not gain weight because of the ride. And we eat very, very well and stay at very, very nice places. And there's just something very different about seeing a place, whether it's Israel or any place, on a bike. You're going slower, you can stop, you smell the air, you feel the heat, you feel the cold, you feel the rain, you feel the wind. It's very tactile. It's a full experience in so many different ways. And it's unique, and it will leave an impression. As anyone who's taken the ride will certainly say that. And if you haven't, it will leave a lifelong impression on you, as will the Institute. So I think I'll stop there and open it up for Q&A and leave it at that. So thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I always come with questions, so I have questions, but I've also gotten to ask you questions on 7 or 8 previous Israel rides. Can I open up to others for questions? You can either put them in the chat or just unmute yourself or raise your hand and tell us what you'd like to learn about. Peter?
One of the things that made the last year's ride really special, of course, was the election happened right at the time of the ride, and we spoke to 2 MKs on the ride. Spoke to us. It was really a unique experience, and the fact that Alon could give us this breakdown of what happened, and he held nothing back at his disappointment. My question is it's a very different time now. And it's a different Israel because of the demonstrations and the rest. And I'm wondering, it seems like there should be no going back from that political edge that people on the ride just got a unique glimpse of the reality of a divided Israel. And I'm wondering if there's any way that will be addressed.
I'm going to defer to David and Howie for that question. But I'm always happy to talk about that on the ride.
Yeah, I can't speak to all the details of the program we're doing on the ride this year. Partly that's just a function of sort of how my time gets allocated, and some things also don't get finalized. I'm going to turn it to Howie, but Michael, I was going to ask a question that's a little bit of what Peter might partly be getting at, which is, how do we take some of the lessons that the Institute can offer and bring them to bear on understanding the current situation in Israel? Is that too big a question? Can you focus in on it? Should I jump to Howie to talk about programming on this year's ride?
Let me just say a word about this year's ride, and then I think there's Michael will have a lot to talk about, because that's a great question. I think you can't be in Israel and not feel and see and touch what's going on, and that will and so we will be part of that. We don't plan to spend a lot of time specifically programming associated with that, but you'll be there with lots of Israelis, with all the crew who will all have opinions, and as well as your fellow riders. And I think it'll be a general topic of conversation. We certainly try not to take a political stand as it relates to the ride being taking one side or another. And I think, as David suggested, and as Rabbi Michael will talk about, there's an awful lot that what's going on in Israel today, and in parallel, probably what's going on in America today, can learn from the Arava Institute and its approach. So I'll give you that as an intro, Michael, and then take it away.
Thank you, David and Howie, and Peter, thank you for your question. The one thing I will also say, Peter, in terms of the calendar events, I believe it's September 12th, the full Israeli Supreme Court is going to sit, which has never happened before. You have the full 15 members of the Supreme Court sit and hear a case. And it's a challenge to the vote in the Knesset a couple of weeks ago on dealing with that one aspect of judicial reform in terms of whether they can review it or not. So we will be in the wake of that decision. And so we'll see how that unfolds, as we get closer to the ride. But that's kind of the next moment in terms of this chapter that Israel is going through. In terms of, I'm asked this question a lot often in terms of the United States as well as in Israel, and clearly there are the parallels in terms of the challenges that these two democracies are going through right now, and other democracies around the world for that matter. I mean, at the end of the day, and it goes back to something I said earlier, it's about trust. It's about creating trust, because when you trust somebody, you can still vehemently disagree with them, but engage. And one of the great challenges that we have in Israel, and I would argue the United States as well, is how do we build trust between people? That's one question out there. The second thing is, one of the things why we're so successful at the Institute, I would argue it's for a number of points. And one of them is that unlike when you usually bring Israelis and Palestinians together, which is usually maybe for a weekend, 2 weeks in the summer, once a month, our students are together 24/7 for 4 months or 24/7 for an academic year. We have the luxury of time. And that not only does it build the trust, it builds those touch points, but it means you don't have to answer those really hard questions immediately. You can think, you can ponder, you can go for a walk in the desert 2 weeks after you've had a really intense conversation. So part of it, if we're going to have fruitful conversations in Israel and the United States, we need to remember that these have to be long-term engagements. God bless John Lennon, who's saying instant karma is going to get you. I've always disagreed with that title of that song. It's hard, long work. And that's one of the other things that we've learned at the Institute. So those are building trust, and it's a long-term engagement. And the third thing, and this is something I bring from, I also teach conflict resolution at Bennington College, and sometimes get parachuted to talk about at the Institute. And one of my favorite theories is called positions, interest, and needs. So I'm going to try to do, I just wrote this while Howie was talking. So it's two triangles. So you've got positions separated, and then you've got overlapping triangles where you have overlapping interests and overlapping needs. The interests are shorter, the needs are longer. And the point there is that when we look at a conflict, we see that gap between the 2 points of the triangle. But where they overlap, there's some overlapping interests and there's some overlapping needs that people share. And that's the thing to start with. And that's, if you will, the magic sauce of the Arava Institute. It's the environment. Who is not going to say they care about the environment? And you can say that's an interest or a need. And so you find in a political discourse or a political disagreement, find a shared interest or need. And that's where the conversation is. Because then you share something together, and you can then build off of that. When we look at the Arab-Israeli conflict from the perspective of geopolitics, we see lines, borders, walls, and divisions. When we look at this exact same piece of real estate from the perspective of the environment, those walls and divisions might still remain, but we can easily nudge them aside for a moment, and it's a completely different vista. It's the same piece of land, but we're now looking from a perspective of the environment. And as we say at the Arava Institute, nature knows no borders. And so you find something common and you build off of that. So those are some of the lessons, I think, from what we do at the Institute that are applicable to the political discourse or lack of discourse that we see in Israel as well as the United States right now.
Thank you. Neil, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks, David. Hi, Michael. Good to see you again. Maybe I can turn on my camera now. We've stopped showing.
Thank you.
I'm interested. I mean, I don't know if this is an easy question or a hard question, a long or short answer, but I'm just interested in how this environment, which is fraught and challenging in Israel, is affecting the Institute. Is it building energy? Is it sapping energy? Is it changing priorities? Is it redoubling efforts? I can only imagine that when the environment is this, the discourse is this sharp and harsh, and when there are forces in power that probably are not sympathetic to all the goals in terms of the social goals of the Institute, that there's not some influence. I'm just curious if you can touch on any of that. Maybe a very short answer. I don't know, but it's a question that's on my mind.
Great. Good to see you, Neil, and look forward to seeing you over there. We're right now, at least up until now, we really have not been affected by what's going on politically within Israel. Doesn't mean people don't talk about it or are very aware of it, and it kind of hangs there. We are much more affected by the worsening relationship between Israelis and Palestinians. That's really been getting worse and worse and worse over the last couple of years. And part of it is the anti-normalization movement that's growing up in the Palestinian community, where they've said, okay, we've had 25 years of Oslo. We were supposed to get a state after 5 years. We only see more settlements, more occupation, frustration. And so there are many people within the Palestinian community now that say, basically, to work with an Israeli, you're a traitor, or you're working to normalize the occupation. So we are actually feeling more of that as a pressure in terms of work that we need, both in terms of drawing students and in terms of some of the collaborative work that we need to do. So that's more touching us than the internal Israeli political structure, which doesn't say that may not happen. It just hasn't happened. Up to this point, it's stayed away from us. I will say, and I don't know if this is still true, but certainly in previous years, some of our greatest supporters have been, David, you'll appreciate this, the right side of the political spectrum. Yuri Stern, who was the founder of Yisrael Beiteinu, Lieberman's party, was one of our greatest supporters in the Knesset. Now, Yuri Stern and I would clearly disagree politically on where things should go. But at the end of the day, he understood the environment doesn't care about where those final borders are going to be. And he was one of our greatest supporters in our early years in the Knesset. And I would like to see that as nature knows borders, it transcends political boundaries, that still holds. But we'll see as the next year or two unfolds in Israel. And I will say there's a similar bipartisanship within Congress. 3 years ago, Congress passed the Nita Lowey Middle East Peace Partners Act, $50 million for each of the next 5 years for programs like Arava and the other 160 organizations of the Alliance for Middle East Peace that's doing work between Israelis and Palestinians. That was a bipartisan act named after Nita Lowey, the Democrat, as she was retiring after 32 years with Republican support. And so we can see where this kind of work can transcend those political boundaries at times.
Thank you. Michael, you said something that left me curious. I think often, especially for those of us who have adult kids who, as they went through college, they thought about studying in other countries, and in some cases studied in Israel. What's it take for a Jordanian or a Palestinian to become a student at the Arava Institute?
So in Jordan, we take out an ad in the Jordanian newspaper. It says, come study environment in the Arava Valley. It's in Arabic, but it doesn't say what side of the border in the Arava Valley.
Mm-hmm.
There's a phone number they call. We have a Jordanian student recruiter. It's pretty clear early on in the conversation what side of the fence it's on. And some people will just decide, okay, I'm not going to come. Others are interested. They also hear, we have enough alumni. We've, maybe I'm guessing about 400 alumni in Jordan right now after all these years. So there's also word of mouth that people find out about the Institute. In Jordan, there, even predating what's happening in the Palestinian communities right now, there's been a very unfavorable reaction for most Jordanians when they tell their friends and family they're going to go study in Israel. That is not translated into the Jordanian street. But I will tell you this, I have seen and witnessed more than once where a Jordanian will take their Israeli and American Jewish friends home to their families who are not into this idea. And the Jordanians fall in love, of course, with these Jews. But at the end of the day, they're washing dishes, usually with their mother in the kitchen, who says, you know what? I learned I have more in common with the Israeli Jew than the American Jew. Yeah, they live in the Middle East just like you do. And those are the kind of barriers we're able to break. In the Palestinian communities, we have a Palestinian recruiter, and we have contacts in various Palestinian NGOs and universities, and so that's how Palestinians hear about the program and then apply. And we have full scholarships for Palestinians and Jordanian students, by the way. And we've had students from Gaza the last 2, maybe 3 years now. For a long time, there was a gap. We'd had students from Gaza in the early years, but we're getting students from Gaza again. And through our Center for Environmental Diplomacy, we've had environment technicians from Gaza come to the Institute for training and then go back to Gaza with that know-how. So we're also able to do that as well.
And I guess part of the question, then I'll ask others for their questions again, but with this sort of increased opposition within those communities against normalization, do the students, when a student chooses to come to Israel, what's it mean for them and their family?
That is a very individual question. For some, it's not an issue at all. For others, it's they do not tell anybody where they are, and that full spectrum. And so it's really that full spectrum, and it varies from individual to individual, and in terms of how that gets played out. You should know we have an agreement. Actually, as I mentioned, I teach also at Bennington College. It's often difficult for a Jordanian or Palestinian to bring back a transcript from Ben Gurion University back home. So we have an agreement now for the last couple of years with Bennington College where Jordanian and Palestinian students of ours can actually get a transcript from Bennington College for their studies at Arava, so they don't lose that academic time period.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. That's cool.
You learn how to slalom through the realities of that part of the world.
Yeah, no, and I'm mindful because one of the things I help coordinate on the ride is the photography, and we are careful to be respectful. There's definitely students at the Institute or alumni who have concerns that our photos of them could put them at risk. So we actually work very hard to screen out those photos and make sure they don't end up on social media. It has to be a cooperative effort because our photographers start off wanting to get pictures of everybody. So if you don't want to be in a picture, you got to be mindful of it. But it is something that we've tried to be really sensitive to. So thank you. Other questions? Stories?
I have a question. I'm curious. It's great to hear that these Palestinian and Jordanian students take personal risks. I wonder if there's any follow-up months and years later from the individuals who participate, whether they say their attitudes were permanently changed, or they're able to talk to their friends back home about how normal, if you will, for lack of a better term, their experience was in Israel, or that the Israelis aren't all demons. Do we have anything follow up? Like, is there an alumni association that could give us some feedback about how that works years later?
There actually is an alumni association. It's kind of an amazing organization. There's a Facebook page, and we're constantly seeing our alumni sharing ideas, helping each other with projects. We have a fund actually for alumni to work on joint projects together. We have anecdotal stories we can tell in the positive in terms of your question. One of the things that we need to do as we go forward is to do a much more concrete review and going back to our alumni in terms of those kind of impacts. Again, we have lots of anecdotal information about that as we stay in touch with our alumni, but it's something that we need to do a little bit more seriously, almost from an academic perspective, to really quantify that more as an answer. But there are many examples of that in the positive.
Because you described how Bennington College cooperates to get them credits.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of begs the question, without Bennington College, their time would be a black mark on their past. I wonder how they feel about it 5 years later, or how their friends who they might tell about this. I mean, have they changed, and are they still riding under the radar with their experience? So do they go back? Because certainly the Jordanian press hasn't changed for a while.
I mean, again, that answer is going to be varied from individual to individual. Where some who will, be very happy to talk about their experiences both outwardly or privately. Those who will be willing to talk about it at least privately with family and friends, and those who will absolutely not for fear. And it really is that full spectrum. And we've seen, and I can anecdotally tell that over 6 years seeing that.
Thank you.
I might add, I think for a lot of the riders, one of the most telling experiences on the ride, on Shabbat of the ride, all of the programming is optional, but one program I always encourage people to try and attend is we do small breakout groups. That it'll be a small group of riders with students and alums from the Institute, and self-selected, the student and alumni groups in each little circle will include at a minimum one person from each of the three populations Michael mentioned. So an Israeli, a Palestinian, and probably somebody also from the rest of the world. And it's really eye-opening, I think, for the riders to meet them. And it's on a couple of dimensions. A lot of the riders have good chance they've never met or had a conversation with a Palestinian, and good chance that they've never really had a chance to see a Palestinian and a Jewish Israeli who clearly have a deep trust relationship. And I've had the opportunity to be in those dialogues for each year I've done the ride. It's still a priority each year because it's always eye-opening. And David, I think it gets to part of your question. It's self-selected because these are the people who are there and available. But for many, it's definitely a life-changing experience. Mindy, unmute, ask your question. Thank you for raising your hand.
So a number of people asked about the impact of people who came from either Jordan or Palestinians and what they feel that they can share and can't share when they go back home. I'm curious what the impact is on Israel.
Yeah, on
Israeli, on on our side, where I'm concerned about what's happening in Israel, and certainly with, are we becoming more at peace with neighbors, but how is it impacting Israeli society, or is there an impact?
I mean, in terms of, for many of our Israelis, their experience of the Arva Institute is their first time of really getting to know an Arab, whether it's an Israeli Arab or a Palestinian or a Jordanian. And that's a major component of what happens at the Institute. And it's really life-changing in terms of understanding a neighbor who's been there all the time that they've never known. And that really goes, often it's two ways. It's in both directions. And if there have been previous encounters, they're often unhealthy. And so this is the first kind of healthy relationship that they've had with other. And they certainly with the Israelis, they bring it back to their communities. One of the great challenges of this work is something called the asymmetry of the sensational, where the sensational bad news gets all of the attention. And I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but there's a whole other reality out there. There are another 170 organizations like the Rabbi Institute for Environmental Studies with Israelis and Palestinians working together that very few people know about. And part of our challenge is how do we reclaim the conversation? When the media only, so as you may know, in Hebrew, the word is, or truth is emet. It's more or less the first, middle, and last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Truth is all encompassing. Sheker, which is lie, is shin kuf resh. It's 3 letters right next to each other. That is, a lie only gives you part of the picture. So the media only tells us the bad things going on. And again, I'm not saying it's not, it's happening. But when it doesn't give us the full picture of what else is going on, like the Rabbi Institute, like Seeds of Peace, like Jerusalem Peace Builders, I could go on and on and on. We're being told a lie. And I've seen this affect members of Congress when I bring our Israeli and Palestinian Jordanian alumni to members of Congress. They're blown away because they're reading the same newspapers that you and I read. And their assumption is it's all hopeless. And it's not. There is an ecosystem of organizations like ours out there doing profound, powerful work. And the challenges, both within Israeli and Palestinian societies and Jordan, is how do we speak louder and get heard better? So Israelis and Palestinians have an off-ramp to the reality of how they're dealing with each other these days. That's what we need to do.
One of the analogies that I use to talk about the Rabbi Institute is it's like taking a pebble and throwing it in a pond, in a quiet pond. And what happens when you do that? You see the ripples just float out around it. Every one of these students that we send out goes to ripple into their world. Yes, in some cases, the Jordanians are not able to be as open about it. But I can't tell you that, but the Israelis go back and are open about it. The Palestinians go back and are open about it, and just as an important way. It's just, again, showing that people can really live together. People can really be together. And although everybody is so close physically, they're so far, and there are huge walls up, even when there is no physical wall, just between Arab villages in Israel and Israeli Jewish villages, between people in the West Bank. So we have this opportunity, and much of the money that we raise supports scholarships for students to help increase the number of pebbles that get thrown in the pond.
Well said, Howie. Well said.
I don't
Take it
have
away,
a
Marian.
question.
Yes.
Hi, I just got back from Israel and yesterday morning, so I'm still a little bit tired, but I was just thinking as I was coming back, I was online next to a Palestinian family, it was a mother, father, and 2 young sons. And I'm studying Arabic, with a group of Israelis and Americans on Zoom. So I was practicing my Arabic with them. And I was thinking they were like extremely interested and helpful to help me find some words. I was thinking, as I was talking with them and after, how the ripple effect, might take place. Like I was thinking, well, maybe now they see a Jewish person who is friendly to them, who's interested in their language, and it will leave a little mark, a little dent, and toward thinking differently about their Jewish neighbors. So I think on the level of, just person to person, without all this mishigas going on, people can connect, and it's, yeah, I mean, I just think that it's the interactions on the very micro level that can make a difference. I just think that it's all the frenzy, everything that's going on, it like whips up people's emotions and makes it really, really hard to make contact. I'm realizing my Mac is gonna run out of power any second. So if I get cut off, it's because it's not plugged in.
Thank you for that, Marion, and it made me think of something. So I mentioned we have English tutorials going on there, but what also happens, there's a lot of informal teaching of Hebrew and Arabic between the students and informal classes they set up. And so that's one of the other touch points. And as some of you may know, we're in the midst or beginning to build a whole new campus at the Institute, go from 60, 90 to 120 to eventually 150 participants. And for some of us, one of the dreams is in the summers before the semester starts is to have a simultaneous English, Hebrew, and Arabic intensive language courses going on at the same time, because that everyone's interested in learning each other's language when they're there. Everybody is.
I think that's the way, by the language, the mother tongue, it's like through language, through food, through activities together, it's, you get to know more about the person.
It's partly, as Michael said at the top, it's creating many touch points. And clearly you did that with this family, which is wonderful. We are at the top of the hour, and I like to be respectful of people's time. Hopefully, first off, Michael, thank you so much for joining us tonight, for all the work you do on behalf of the Institute, and also for the fact that you'll be on the ride this year. A short plug, but meaningful. A new program that we just started a couple of years ago was to give people who are on the ride an opportunity after the ride to spend a day at the Arava Institute. And I strongly encourage everyone who's going to be joining us on the ride this year to take a look at that. It's one of the post-ride options. It's overnight at the Institute. And the key is, that it's a beautiful part of the country, but you'll have seen that on a bike ride. But spending a day there, you get to learn from the faculty, you get to learn from the students who are currently there, and you get a little bit of, it's only a day. So as Michael said in part of his comments, the real Institute programs have the luxury of time. We'll have the luxury of 36 hours. But I would hope that each of you is going to be joining us on the ride this year. Give that a little bit of thought. It'll be a chance to learn more and really have probably a deeper sense of some of the experience that the students go through there. So with that, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you so much, Michael, for being here. If I recall correctly, you said you're leaving tomorrow for Israel?
Sunday from here,
Sunday.
and then Tuesday, wheels up, a week in Venice, land September 6th in Israel into the kibbutz on the 7th.
Well, have a safe trip. Marion blazed the trail for you. So it's nice. We've got people coming, going, and many of us will be there come October for the ride. So thank you all very much. We will be posting the recording of this to make it available. And certainly if you have friends who you'd like to be sure that they hear it and learn from it, don't hesitate to share it with them. So thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you, everybody. All the best.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to
All right. Thank you, Howie. We still have one on. I'm going to close out the meeting, which should bounce everybody off.